Hello friend, welcome to Stories by Tochi. We bring you interesting folk tales. Please don't forget to hit the like button, please share, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you for doing so. Now let's get into the story. The city pulsed with energy that night, a mix of neon lights and distant car horns blending into the background as Praise stepped out of her car. She had spent the entire week drowning in deadlines and responsibilities, the weight of her achievements pressing down on her shoulders like an invisible chain. She was proud of what she had built, her independence, her success, her ability to stand tall in a world that demanded too much. But tonight she wasn't here to think about work, investments, or her ever-growing to-do list. Tonight she was here to let loose. The club's entrance buzzed with life, the heavy bass of the music vibrating through the ground as she walked in. Her heels clicked against the sleek floor, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to sink into the moment. The dim lighting, the scent of expensive cologne and spilled cocktails, the feel of strangers brushing past, it was chaotic, yet intoxicating. She ordered a drink, something strong enough to quiet her thoughts, and leaned against the bar, watching the crowd sway and move in time with the music. That was when she noticed him. He wasn't dancing like the others, nor was he lost in a drunken haze. He sat at a VIP booth, his presence commanding yet effortlessly relaxed. There was something about him, the way he carried himself, the quiet confidence that didn't need to beg for attention yet still demanded it. He was wealthy, that much was obvious from the Rolex on his wrist and the tailored fit of his dark suit. But it wasn't just the wealth that made him stand out. It was the way he observed the room, as if he already owned it. Praise wasn't the type to be easily impressed, but there was something magnetic about him. When their eyes met, a slow, knowing smile spread across his lips, and just like that, the game began. She didn't approach him first, nor did he immediately make a move, but there was an unspoken understanding between them. When he finally stood and walked towards her, she didn't look away. "I'm Israel," he said, his voice smooth, his gaze unwavering. He didn't ask for her name. He already knew she would tell him. And she did. The conversation between them flowed effortlessly, laced with flirtation and teasing. But beneath the surface, there was something else, a curiosity, a pull neither of them could ignore. Israel wasn't just another rich man throwing money around. He was calculated, deliberate, the kind of man who knew exactly what he wanted and how to get it. Praise found herself drawn in, intrigued not just by his charm, but by the sense of mystery he carried. They talked, they laughed, and as the hours slipped away, numbers were exchanged. He didn't press for more, didn't try to rush things. It was a slow, deliberate game, and for once, Praise didn't mind playing along. As she left the club that night, her mind lingered on the encounter. Israel. The name alone felt dangerous, thrilling. She didn't know then that meeting him would change everything, that it would be the beginning of a story she never could have written for herself. Praise had never been the type to lose herself in a man. She had spent years crafting a life that revolved around her own ambitions, building a career that gave her everything she needed, security, independence, the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had made it on her own. But Israel had a way of making her forget all of that, if only for a moment. Their conversation stretched late into the night, his voice wrapping around her like silk, each word carrying an intensity that was impossible to ignore. He wasn't just a man with wealth, he was a man with presence, with purpose. And for the first time in a long while, Praise found herself looking forward to something beyond her own plans. Their first real date was nothing short of perfect, an evening in a private rooftop restaurant where the city lights flickered like fallen stars beneath them. Praise wasn't easily impressed, but Israel had a way of making extravagance feel intimate, like every detail had been chosen just for her. The wine was rich, the laughter effortless, and as she sat across from him, she couldn't help but wonder if she was finally stepping into the kind of love story she had always dismissed as fantasy. As the days turned into weeks, Israel seamlessly wove himself into her life, and for once, Praise allowed it. He was thoughtful in ways that caught her off guard, remembering the smallest details, anticipating her needs before she even voiced them. When she had a particularly stressful day at work, he sent her favorite flowers, not just as an apology for his absence, but as a quiet reminder that he was paying attention. He never needed to explain his wealth. It spoke for itself in the way he carried himself, in the effortless way he moved through the world. Praise had dated before, but no one had ever made her feel this way, cherished yet free, adored yet never suffocated. But through it all, there was one constant, Gabriel. Israel's best friend was always there, a shadow lingering in the background of their love story. At first, Praise thought nothing of it. It wasn't unusual for men to have close friendships, and Israel made no effort to hide Gabriel's importance in his life. He spoke of him often, his voice laced with affection and loyalty, and when Praise finally met him, she understood why. Gabriel was charming, easygoing in a way that balanced Israel's intensity, and though his presence was always there, it never felt intrusive. If anything, it reassured her, showed her that Israel was a man who valued deep connections. Time passed, and what started as attraction blossomed into something deeper. Israel made her feel safe in a way she hadn't even realized she craved. With him, she didn't have to be the woman who had fought so hard to stand on her own. She could simply be Praise. He introduced her to his world, to the quiet luxuries and silent power that came with his status, and though she had built her own success, being with him felt like stepping into an entirely new realm. They traveled, shared whispered conversations in the dead of night, and for the first time in a long while, Praise allowed herself to believe that this love, this man, was hers. She had no reason to doubt him, no reason to suspect that beneath the surface of their perfect love, a secret was waiting to shatter everything she had allowed herself to dream. If only she had looked closer. If only she had questioned the way Israel's gaze softened just a little too much when he spoke of Gabriel. But love has a way of blinding even the strongest of women, and Praise had never been in love quite like this. It was an evening wrapped in golden hues, the sky painted with the soft brushstrokes of a setting sun. Praise had spent the entire day wrapped in the comfort of Israel's presence, unaware that he had planned something far beyond the quiet intimacy they had come to cherish. They were on a secluded beach, the kind of place that felt untouched by the world, where the only sounds were the rhythmic crashing of waves and the distant cry of seagulls. She had always loved the ocean. There was something about its vastness, its untamed beauty, that reminded her of herself. Israel knew that. He always knew the things that made her feel alive. As they walked along the shoreline, the wind teasing the hem of her dress, he held her hand with a certainty that had become familiar. But there was something different in his grip tonight, something firmer, more resolute. She didn't notice the way his gaze flickered with hesitation, the way his breath caught in his throat, before he finally stopped walking, pulling her gently to face him. "Praise," he murmured, his voice carrying an uncharacteristic softness, as if he were afraid the words might break in the air between them. He reached into his pocket, and before she could fully process what was happening, he was kneeling on one knee, the fading sunlight catching the glint of a diamond ring between his fingers. The world seemed to still around them. Praise's breath hitched, her heart slamming against her ribcage as an unexpected rush of emotions crashed over her. Love had always been something she approached cautiously, carefully, something she measured with logic rather than blind feeling. But in that moment there was no calculation, no hesitation. Only him. "Marry me," Israel said, his voice steady despite the emotion simmering beneath it. His eyes, dark and unwavering, searched hers for an answer, and for the first time in her life, Praise let herself surrender to the unknown. A slow smile spread across her lips, and before she could second-guess herself, she whispered, "Yes." The word felt foreign yet right, as if it had been waiting on her tongue all along. Israel slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands warm against hers, and as he rose to press a lingering kiss to her lips, the waves lapped at their feet like silent witnesses to the moment. Their engagement became a whirlwind of celebrations, a spectacle of love and luxury that only Israel could orchestrate. Praise found herself swept into the frenzy of wedding preparations, choosing the perfect dress, curating the guest list, making sure every detail reflected the grandness of the life she was about to step into. Gabriel, of course, was there every step of the way. His presence was effortless, his bond with Israel undeniable. He was the best man, the confidant, the silent pillar in the background of their love story. Praise never questioned it. Why would she? She had one. She had the man, the ring, the promise of a future built on passion and devotion. The day of the wedding arrived in a blur of white and gold, the ceremony unfolding like a dream. Vows were exchanged, hands intertwined, and as Israel kissed her with the fervor of a man who had found his forever, Praise believed in the illusion they had created. She was a wife now. She was his. And as the night settled into exhaustion, as she lay beside the man she had promised forever to, she had no reason to suspect that forever would be the first thing to shatter. The reception had stretched late into the night, a blur of laughter, clinking glasses, and the kind of unfiltered joy that only comes with celebration. Praise had danced until her feet ached, smiled until her cheeks burned, and allowed herself for once to exist in the moment without overthinking what came next. By the time she and Israel returned to their home, her body hummed with exhaustion, but her heart felt full. The house was still and quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos of the day, and as she stepped out of her gown, she savored the feeling of being alone with her husband for the first time as his wife. Israel was tired too. She could see it in the looseness of his posture, the way his usual composure had melted away into something softer. They had barely spoken since arriving, exchanging only tired smiles and gentle touches as they settled into bed. Praise didn't mind. There would be time for everything else. For now, all she wanted was sleep. The last thing she remembered before drifting off was the feeling of Israel's arm draped over her waist, his warmth anchoring her to the present. Sometime deep into the night, Praise stirred awake. At first, it was nothing, just the slow process of her body adjusting, her mind floating between dreams and reality. But as she shifted, reaching instinctively for the warmth beside her, her hand met only empty sheets. Confusion trickled in, slow and unsettling. She blinked, allowing her eyes to adjust to the dim glow of moonlight filtering through the curtains. The house was silent, but something about it felt off. Sitting up, she ran a hand through her hair and glanced toward the bathroom. The door was open, the light off. Not there. A glance at the clock on the nightstand told her it was just past midnight. The logical part of her said there was no reason to be concerned. Maybe he had gone to get water. Maybe he needed fresh air. But something deep in her gut whispered otherwise. Swinging her legs over the side of the bed, she slipped into her robe and padded barefoot through the house. The hallway stretched before her, dark and undisturbed, yet every step she took made the unease claw at her skin. She checked Gabriel's room next, expecting to find them talking, laughing, caught in some late-night conversation as they often were. But the room was empty, the bed untouched, the silence too thick. It wasn't until she reached the patio doors, the ones leading to the pool at the back of the house, that her stomach truly dropped. The faint sound of water sloshing met her ears, and as she stepped outside, the sight before her sent ice shooting through her veins. There, in the pale glow of the moon, was her husband, her Israel, wrapped in Gabriel's arms, their bodies tangled in a way that left no room for doubt. For a moment, time splintered. Her breath hitched, the world narrowing to just this impossible, devastating scene playing out before her. The water lapped gently around them as if mocking her stillness, as if daring her to blink, to wake up, to understand. Then, as if they had felt her presence, they turned to look at her. And the most terrifying thing wasn't that she had caught them. It was the way they didn't flinch, the way Israel, The man who had vowed his life to her only hours ago met her gaze with eerie calmness. He moved first, stepping out of the water, droplets tracing along his skin as he reached for a towel. Gabriel followed, his expression unreadable. "Sit down," Israel said, voice steady, unbothered, as if she had merely walked in on an innocent conversation. Praise didn't move, couldn't move. And then Gabriel spoke, his tone almost gentle. "You'll have to accept it." That was the moment she knew. This wasn't just a mistake. It was something far more cruel. And as she stood there, frozen in the wake of their indifference, a slow, terrible realization settled in her bones. She wasn't going to cry. She wasn't going to break. She was going to burn them both to the ground. The morning after felt surreal, as if Praise had woken up in someone else's life. The house was quiet, unnervingly so, but not in the way that signaled peace. It was the silence of something broken, of an unspoken war waiting to unfold. She sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the ring on her finger, her mind replaying every detail of the night before, the pool, the water clinging to their skin, the way they had looked at her. Not with shame, not with guilt, just expectation. They truly believed she would accept it, that she would swallow the humiliation and learn to live in their carefully crafted world of secrets. But they didn't know her. They didn't know the storm brewing beneath her ribs, the way betrayal had set her blood on fire. Praise had always been careful, calculating, but last night had given her something new, clarity. There was no need for confrontation, no need for screaming matches or accusations that would be met with dismissive shrugs. Israel had made his choice. Now she would make hers. By the time she emerged from the room, she had painted herself in something close to indifference. Her movements were smooth, controlled, her face an unreadable mask. She found them in the kitchen, casually drinking coffee like nothing had changed. Gabriel leaned against the counter, effortlessly at ease, while Israel skimmed through his phone, unreadable as ever. It was almost laughable, the way they had moved on, the way they expected her to adjust like a piece of furniture in their home. She poured herself a cup of coffee, letting the silence stretch between them, waiting to see if they would acknowledge what had happened. It was Israel who finally spoke. "We should talk," he said, his tone measured, like he was offering a business proposal rather than addressing the fact that he had shattered their marriage before it had even begun. Praise stirred her coffee slowly, letting the spoon clink softly against the ceramic. When she finally met his gaze, her expression was unreadable. "There's nothing to talk about," she said smoothly. "I understand everything now." A flicker of something passed through Israel's eyes, surprise, maybe, or curiosity. But he didn't push. He thought she was surrendering. He thought she was accepting. And that was his first mistake. For the next few weeks, Praise played the role of the understanding wife perfectly. She didn't cry, didn't question. She let them believe she had come to terms with her new reality, that she was willing to exist in the margins of their twisted love. But behind the quiet compliance, she was working, watching, planning. She studied them both, the way they moved, the way they spoke when they thought she wasn't listening. She learned their habits, their weaknesses, the small details that would later become weapons in her arsenal. She needed patience. Revenge was not an active impulse, but a carefully orchestrated masterpiece. And when the time was right, she would strike in a way neither of them saw coming. They had taken something from her, her trust, her love, her dignity. Now she would take something from them, and when she was done, there would be nothing left for them to hold on to. Days bled into weeks, yet the weight of that night never lifted. Praise moved through the house with a practiced grace, her expression always composed, her words carefully chosen. She no longer searched for Israel in the middle of the night, nor did she wonder about the whispered conversations between him and Gabriel. She acted as if she had accepted the unspoken rules of their marriage, and in return, Israel treated her with the same distant politeness he always had. Nothing changed on the surface, but beneath it, Praise was shifting. She had learned long ago that power did not come from loud declarations or visible anger. No, true power was quiet. It lurked in the spaces between words, and the moments when people underestimated you. And Israel, so sure of himself, so convinced that she was broken beneath his betrayal, had done exactly that. He thought she had surrendered, that she had melted into the role of the obedient wife. But Praise was not a woman who could be ignored. She was a woman who learned, who adapted, who struck when the time was right. She started small, slipping into the background of their lives while keeping her ears open. Every interaction between Israel and Gabriel became a lesson, every careless touch, every exchange of glances a confirmation of what she already knew. Gabriel was not just a lover to Israel, he was an obsession. There was a recklessness to the way Israel looked at him, a desperation in the way he clung to their stolen moments. It was love, but it was also something darker, something fragile. And fragile things had a way of shattering when too much pressure was applied. Praise studied them both, taking note of their habits, the times they were together, the lies they told to cover their tracks. She gathered information like a patient hunter, waiting for the perfect moment to set her trap. And with each passing day, her plan began to take shape. She wasn't just going to leave Israel. That would be too simple, too kind. No, she was going to destroy him from the inside out, take from him the one thing he valued above all else. And when it was over, he would know what it felt like to be powerless. But playing the long game required more than just patience. It required precision. Praise had to ensure that every move she made went unnoticed, that every thread she pulled unraveled exactly as she intended. So she smiled when she needed to, nodded in agreement when Israel spoke, pretended to be indifferent to his affections for another man. She let them believe she was defeated because it made them careless, and careless men were easy to manipulate. She started leaving subtle suggestions, planting doubts where there had been none before. A comment here, an observation there, each one designed to unsettle Israel, just enough to make him question Gabriel's loyalty. It was a slow poison, seeping into the cracks of their perfect little world, and with every passing day, Praise grew more certain of one thing. This was only the beginning. Praise had always known that patience was the key to destruction. It wasn't enough to strike in anger, to lash out without thought. No, real vengeance required time, it required precision. And so she moved carefully, placing her steps with quiet calculation, ensuring that each decision built toward something greater. Israel and Gabriel remained oblivious, wrapped in the comfort of their deception, believing she had faded into the background. They had no idea that the woman they had wronged was no longer their wife or their afterthought. She was their executioner. The first step was subtle, almost imperceptible. Praise didn't need to scream or accuse. She only needed to plant doubt. She started with Gabriel, weaving small remarks into casual conversations, nothing that would raise alarms, but just enough to linger in the mind. A simple question, has Israel been distant lately, spoken with the right amount of idle curiosity. A fleeting comment, I sometimes wonder if he tells me everything, left hanging just long enough for Gabriel to wonder. Suspicion was a seed that grew quickly when nurtured, and Praise knew exactly how to water it. It didn't take long for her efforts to bear fruit. Gabriel, who had always been so sure of Israel's devotion, began to waver. Praise noticed it in the way his gaze lingered on Israel longer than before, searching for something unseen. She watched as he hesitated before answering Israel's questions, as if second-guessing whether honesty was still safe. And Israel, so accustomed to Gabriel's unwavering loyalty, sensed the change. It was small at first, a missed call that wasn't returned right away, a conversation that felt shorter than usual, but it was enough. Israel was not a man who handled uncertainty well, and Praise could see the first hints of frustration creeping into his movements, the way his jaw tightened when Gabriel didn't immediately respond to his touch. It was beautiful to watch, this unraveling, this slow collapse of the foundation they had built together. Praise had always known their love was built on stolen moments, on secrecy and risk, and all it took was the right pressure to make it crack. But she wasn't done yet. Breaking their bond wasn't enough. She needed to make sure that when they fell, they took each other down completely. So she played her part to perfection, offering Israel the illusion of comfort when he needed it, a quiet presence when Gabriel's withdrawal became too noticeable. She let Israel think he still had control, that she was merely a bystander to his growing frustration, and at the same time she fed Gabriel's insecurity, letting it fester, watching as it poisoned every interaction between them. She saw it in the way Gabriel's voice grew sharper, and the way Israel's patience began to fray. They were turning against each other, piece by piece, and neither of them even realized that she was the one pulling the strings. It was only a matter of time now. Praise wasn't just waiting for them to fall. She was preparing to make sure they never got up again. It started as a shift so subtle that neither Israel nor Gabriel noticed it at first. Praise had long mastered the art of patience, and as she continued to sow quiet discord between them, the effects began to show in the smallest of ways. Gabriel, once secure in his position in Israel's life, had grown uncertain, questioning every pause, every moment of hesitation in Israel's words. It was almost imperceptible, the way his glances became wary, the way he started second-guessing his place. Israel, on the other hand, was restless in a way Praise had never seen before. He was a man used to control, to having things exactly as he wanted them, but for the first time, something was slipping through his fingers. He didn't know how to name it, but Praise did. Doubt. It clung to him like a shadow, creeping into his thoughts, making him see things that weren't there, or perhaps making him realize what had been there all along. The distance between him and Gabriel grew, an invisible wall that neither of them acknowledged, yet neither could ignore. Praise didn't need to force the cracks wider. She only had to watch them spread. The tension in the house became palpable, thick like a storm waiting to break. Conversations that once flowed easily between Israel and Gabriel were now strained, laced with unspoken accusations. A misplaced sigh, a glance held a second too long. Everything between them carried weight now. And then, like clockwork, Israel started turning to Praise in a way he never had before. It wasn't love. She knew better than to believe that. No, this was something else, an instinct, a subconscious pull toward familiarity in a time of uncertainty. He began spending more time in their bedroom, lying beside her in silence, his mind clearly somewhere else. He lingered at the dining table after meals, watching her with an unreadable expression, as if searching for answers in the woman he had long since disregarded, and Praise let him. She didn't push, didn't rush. She only remained steady, a quiet presence amid his unraveling world. It was ironic, really. The man who had thrown her aside was now unconsciously seeking refuge in her. Then came the inevitable breaking point. It happened late one night, when the weight of their unspoken tension finally collapsed in on itself. Praise had been lying in bed, feigning sleep, when she heard the raised voices downstairs, Israel and Gabriel. It started as a murmur, a sharp exchange of words that quickly grew into something more. She listened carefully, noting the cracks in their voices, the sharp edges of their accusations. Gabriel was demanding answers. Why have you been distant? What's changed? While Israel, for the first time, didn't have an immediate answer. His silence was his confession. The argument escalated, a storm of resentment and fear crashing between them, and then came the sound of something shattering against the wall. Praise remained still, staring at the ceiling, her heart steady, her pulse calm. This is it, she thought, the moment she had been waiting for. She had done what she set out to do. And the best part? They still had no idea that she was the one who had set it all in motion. The aftermath of the argument left a charged silence in the house, one that clung to the walls and filled every room with unspoken tension. Praise moved through it with calculated ease, careful not to disturb the delicate balance she had created. She didn't acknowledge the broken glass on the floor near the staircase, nor did she react to the distant sound of a door slamming shut hours ago. Instead, she went about her morning as if nothing had changed, brewing coffee in the kitchen, her fingers tapping idly against the counter as she waited for the pot to fill. But everything had changed. She saw it in the way Israel sat at the dining table, his usual unreadable expression now clouded with something else, exhaustion, uncertainty. His posture, once so rigid with confidence, now sagged slightly, shoulders heavy with thoughts he wasn't ready to voice. Gabriel was nowhere to be seen, and Praise knew that was deliberate. He had always been the one who stormed away first, who put space between them when emotions ran too high. And now, with that space growing wider, she could feel the unraveling reaching its peak. Israel didn't speak at first, only staring at his untouched coffee, lost in whatever thoughts consumed him. Praise took a slow sip from her cup, letting the quiet stretch between them before finally breaking it. "Rough night?" she asked, her tone light, conversational. Israel's gaze flicked up to meet hers, but there was no anger in it, no suspicion, just weariness. "It's nothing," he muttered, though the tightness in his jaw betrayed him. Praise nodded, as if accepting the lie, but she didn't press further. Instead, she shifted the conversation, carefully steering it toward neutral ground, talking about mundane things, the weather, a new restaurant she had read about. And Israel, to her satisfaction, let himself be pulled into it. He clung to the normalcy she offered, perhaps without realizing it, grasping onto the illusion of stability like a man treading water. That was the beauty of her plan. She didn't need to force anything. She only had to wait, and he would come to her willingly. Gabriel, on the other hand, was slipping further away. He hadn't come home the night before, and Israel hadn't gone after him. That alone told Praise everything she needed to know. The cracks had become fractures, deep enough now that they couldn't be ignored. Israel was restless, checking his phone too often, his fingers tapping absently against the table, as if expecting a message that wouldn't come. Praise watched it all unfold, every subtle movement, every unspoken thought. She saw the way his frustration grew with each passing hour, how the space Gabriel had put between them knotted him like an open wound. And yet, he said nothing. He didn't call, didn't chase after him. Whether it was pride or uncertainty that held him back, Praise didn't care. She only knew that the moment he let Gabriel slip away completely, he would fall into the trap she had spent months setting. And then, finally, she would have him exactly where she wanted him, alone, vulnerable, and completely at her mercy. Gabriel's absence stretched into days, and with each passing hour, the weight of it pressed heavier on Israel. Praise could see it in the way he moved, the way his shoulders carried a burden he couldn't name aloud. He had always been a man of control, someone who dictated the terms of his life, but now he was adrift. He barely spoke, his responses to praise reduced to nods or half-hearted words, his mind clearly elsewhere. The tension was no longer simmering beneath the surface. It had boiled over, consuming him in ways he hadn't anticipated. Praise had expected this unraveling, but even she was surprised by how quickly it happened. How fragile their love had been, how easily it crumbled under pressure. She had planted the doubt, but it was Israel who had watered it, who had let it take root and grow into something unbearable. Now, as he sat in the dim light of their living room, staring at his phone as if willing it to ring, Praise knew the moment had arrived. He was alone in every sense of the word, grasping at the pieces of something that had already been lost. She approached him slowly, her presence measured, careful not to disrupt the fragile balance he was clinging to. "Still no word from him?" she asked, her voice soft, almost sympathetic. Israel exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his face. No, just one word, but it carried everything, his frustration, his uncertainty, his slow descent into something close to desperation. Praise lowered herself onto the couch beside him, close enough that he could feel her presence, but not enough to push him away. Maybe he just needs space, she offered. A calculated suggestion, one that planted the idea that this was Gabriel's doing, that Israel wasn't the one responsible for their distance. Israel's jaw tightened, his fingers gripping the phone a little too hard. "It's not like him," he muttered. There was anger there, but more than that, fear. A fear that Gabriel wasn't just distant but gone, that the foundation they had built together had finally cracked beyond repair. Praise let the silence linger, let him sit with his own uncertainty before she spoke again. People don't just walk away unless they have a reason. She let the words settle, watching as they twisted something inside him. She saw the way his expression flickered, the way he hesitated, as if wondering if Gabriel had ever truly been his at all. That night, Israel barely slept. Praise could hear him moving through the house long after midnight, pacing, restless, a man who was slowly being consumed by his own thoughts. Every plan she had set in motion had led to this slow disintegration of his certainty, to the moment he would finally break. And soon, very soon, she would take the final step. Because while Israel grieved the loss of Gabriel, while he let the absence hollow him out from the inside, Praise was already planning what came next. It wasn't enough for him to suffer. He had to lose everything. And in the end, when there was nothing left for him to hold on to, he would finally understand what it felt like to be betrayed, what it felt like to be her. The knock came early in the morning, sharp and insistent, cutting through the silence of the house like a blade. Praise was already awake. She had been lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the quiet satisfaction of a plan that had unfolded exactly as she had intended. Israel, however, had barely stirred, exhausted from another sleepless night. When the knock came again, more forceful this time, he groaned and sat up, rubbing a hand over his face. "Who the hell is that?" he muttered, his voice thick with fatigue. Praise remained still, watching him as he swung his legs over the side of the bed and made his way to the door. He didn't expect what was coming. How could he? But Praise did. She had been waiting for this moment, had counted down the days until it arrived. The moment Israel pulled open the door, everything changed. Officers stood in the doorway, their presence immediate and authoritative. "Mr. Israel Lawson?" One of them asked, though it wasn't really a question. The second officer stepped forward, holding out a piece of paper. "You are under arrest for the murder of Gabriel Cole." For a moment, there was only silence. Then confusion flickered across Israel's face, quickly followed by disbelief. "What?" His voice cracked slightly, his mind clearly struggling to catch up with the words he had just heard. But the officers weren't interested in explanations. "You have the right to remain silent," the officer continued, his voice steady and practiced as he recited the rest of the Miranda rights. Israel didn't fight them. He was too stunned, too disoriented to process what was happening. Praise sat up in bed, her expression one of carefully crafted shock. "What is this?" she gasped, standing up as if she had no idea what was unfolding before her. But inside she was smiling, because this was the moment she had been waiting for. Gabriel's body had been found 2 days ago, dumped in an alley with just enough evidence to lead straight back to Israel. A search of Israel's laptop had revealed incriminating searches, questions about how to kill someone undetected, how to dispose of a body. A murder weapon with his fingerprints had been recovered at the scene. Every single detail had been accounted for, every piece of evidence meticulously planted. And Israel, the man who had once believed he was untouchable, was now watching his world collapse right in front of him. As the officers led him away, he turned back to look at Praise. His eyes were wild, desperate. "Praise, you know I didn't do this," he shouted, his voice filled with disbelief, with a plea he didn't even fully understand yet. But Praise only stood there, her hands covering her mouth as if in shock, her tears perfectly timed. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice breaking just enough to be believable. Israel kept shouting as they dragged him out of the house, his protests growing fainter with every step. And then, finally, there was silence. Praise exhaled slowly, closing her eyes as a wave of satisfaction washed over her. It's done. She had taken everything from him. His love, his freedom, his name. The house, the wealth, the life he had built, all of it was now hers. And the best part? No one would ever suspect her. She was just the devastated wife left behind, the woman who had lost her husband to the cruelty of fate. But in reality, she hadn't lost anything. She had won. And as she stood there, staring at the empty doorway, she allowed herself a small smile. Revenge, she thought, tasted even sweeter than she had imagined. Hope you enjoyed this interesting story. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. See you again in my next story.